Hello, everyone, and welcome to the discourse. Thank you for joining us on this lovely roller coaster of leftist. I don't know. Welcome to the discourse. Thank you for joining us on bullshit. No, I mean whatever. I need to stop my now. But no. Thank you for joining the discourse. I am your host, Brandon Sutton, and you might have noticed my absence for the past 2 weeks, or maybe you didn't. Well, that's too bad. But I'm back. And I'm feeling rested, and I've caught up with politics, sort of, in the news, kind of. And so it's lovely to be back and talk to you about all of the happenings that have happened since I've been gone. And helping me get caught up in politics and the news of the world is my lovely panel of powerful progressive pundits. So let me introduce them to you. I'm sure. Yeah, whatever. I'm sure you know them by now. But let's start with my producer, the lovely, the effervescent, the bedreaded.
Did you just call him effervescent?
He did.
He's not a fucking soda. He's not a
He's Fresca, dude. He's Fresca.
He's a La Croix. Thank you for joining Discourse. This is sponsored by La Croix Sparkling Water.
All right. Well, we're back. Still black, and shit has been a mess, and so we got lots to talk about. And so
that's the best part about being black. Is like when stuff like this happens, like we're uniquely positioned to have the conversation without having to find like one black person to join the panel
we have the opposite problem. We have the white.
Like,
we have
could you imagine if we had like an all-white show? We would have to find like some black person to come on every time like a race thing happened. Be like, okay, like, can you explain? So in your own words, can you explain to us why Charlottesville is the problem? But instead, we can pop shit about whatever. So next up is my Socratic life partner, the effusive Adair.
Execute Order 66 and continue practicing white genocide, folks.
Speaking of Star Wars, like I've never understood. I've never understood the whole Han shot first thing. But anyway, that's a whole different thing.
We don't need to get that started.
And rounding off the square is John McDonald. Hello, John.
Hello, what's going on? So I don't get like an effervescent or anything like that. I'm just John McDonald, rounding off the square.
To be honest with you, white people are not really in my good graces this week. So I mean,
I can understand that, but
considering, so like, you know what, Adair, there's been a lot going on, but can you explain to the viewers, and maybe John, since he seems to not know, with his slightly fashy haircut, why white people might not be in my good graces?
All right, y'all. So here's basically what happened. For those of you who don't know, for some fucking reason, like I really don't know how you can't not know at this point. Y'all are like for real. Anyway, in Charlottesville, you had a bunch of Nazis with their tiki torches because we all know white people are susceptible to mosquito bites. Hopefully, all these fucks get malaria and die. But anyways, they had a rally to argue against the removal of Confederate statues, which, funny enough, were placed during the early 1900s, which was the rise of the KKK originally, and during the Civil Rights Movement. So really, it's about racism and hate and all that other bullshit, but I digress. So they had that rally first. Of course, they were met with opposition the next day with BLM showing up, Antifa showing up, all these other groups that basically say, go fuck yourselves, Nazis, because if you come out the house, we're going to beat your ass on sight, right? So so you had that happen. Then you also had, the white domestic terrorist, also a Nazi, drive a car through a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters, killing one, rest in peace, Heather, injuring, I believe, 17, including 3 critical, and I guess a couple of cops got hurt, though, to be quite honest, I don't really give a fuck about cops. So that was just some of what happened over the weekend. Following that, we had violent assaults by neo-Nazis on other protesters. So we saw that they rushed the crowd. Several people of color were assaulted. One brother had his skull was cracked open. They attacked people with pipes. They attacked people with whatever they could get their hands on, essentially. You also had literal armed militia of white people with automatic assault weapons escorting Nazis through America. American streets, an armed militia escorting Nazis. So that is what happened if you live under a rock or you're just fucking dumb. Of course, if you don't know what's going on, I assume you're the latter or you're Brandon.
I mean, so I think there is truth in that. And so far,
I think my headlines read by Adair more often. I'm just saying. Go on. That was better than anything I saw on the news. But go ahead, continue.
I mean, I was on a media blackout when this, this sort of whole thing went down. But of course, you can be on there's like a media blackout and literally living under a rock. And so once this, I always know when there's big news when my gyms. When they're talking about what happened on the ESPN at my gym, because my gym 100% plays ESPN, on every TV all the time, and the conversation around Charlottesville was the focal point on a lot of different shows on ESPN. So I was like, okay, like this is actually big news. Like this is one of those things that actually has sort of, it's one of those political issues, quote unquote, that has infiltrated the mainstream discourse. And so I do want to point out that Heather was a member of the IWW, which is in some ways being industrial workers of the world, which is in some way being erased from the conversation. So let's just make sure we properly identify her. She was a paralegal, 32-year-old. By all counts, she was a wonderful person, organizer, etc. Rest in peace.
If you go out into a crowd of Nazis and you're out there fighting for people of color and other marginalized groups, you're a good person in my book. Like, there is no question Heather was an amazing human being, and that Nazi piece of shit that killed her deserves the worst punishment possible. Again, I think all Nazis deserve the worst possible punishment because, in the 1940s, real Americans killed Nazis.
I don't know about that.
Did we not? Did real Americans not invade Normandy and kill Nazis?
So did the communists.
Sure they did.
So did the communists. But honestly, like there's a lot to this story. So let's try to unpack it as best we can because there's so many different portions of it. So where would you guys like to start? Right? Like where do you think we should start with this one? I'll let any of you guys chime in.
I mean, we should probably start by a little bit about why there was something going on there in the first place. That it was around the monument and kind of that. We'll start with that a little bit.
White people's feelings were hurt because their participation trophies were being taken away because they're shitty fucking people. That's why the fuck they were in Charlottesville. Fuck them.
Well, yeah. So
and they wanted to kill black people.
It was the removal. It was the removal of a Confederate statue, which in some ways is apparently a more contentious issue than I won't know. It's about as contentious I would imagine because a new poll came out to show that the majority of Americans, or at least 67% of Americans, in some sense, think that statues of Confederates war heroes should stay up.
That's a bullshit poll. The question asked was bullshit. I mean, come on. If you had said, let's replace every Confederate statue with something to commemorate what is going on and why we shouldn't slide back into, racist Jim Crow or slavery, then I think that 66% of the population would approve that as well. The way the press question was phrased was a matter of let's not forget our history. And I think a lot of people would agree with that, even the normies. So,
So, I agree with you right now, but I think that those sorts of things.
Forgetting the history is what they want to do. Is they just want to remember the glossy parts. Go ahead, Brandon.
No, I agree with that. But a lot of these appeals to history, a lot of these appeals to history are coded racist appeals, right? The whole "Make America Great," "Make America Great Again." It's appeal to a nostalgified. The whole Trump slogan of "Make America Great Again" wasn't a appeal to a nostalgic version of the 1950s, the Jim Crow segregated era of United States of America, where things were somehow better because things were more, were less diverse, right?
Well, one second. Let's actually take that apart. What you just said real quick, because you said something important. You said things were somehow better, right? Things were factually better for white people in the 1950s. Just factually speaking, things were better for them.
Of course.
White supremacy was inherently codified. It was expected. It was the norm. So just by default, life was better for white people in the 50s. It wasn't better for anybody else. And we know this.
Yeah, there was
particularly in the unions as well, which is often overlooked, as the unions were heavily segregated, and even though they sometimes were fighting for black rights and so on and so forth, they were also heavily segregated, especially at the top. But continue.
Oh no, definitely there was less competition in the market because of white supremacy. So obviously it sort of fit into this notion that white people were doing better, but because of some sort of merit, because of merit. At the same time, the idea that people were doing better in the 1950s is in some ways, it's nostalgia, right? It's like it's based on imagined view of the past that's created from dissatisfaction with the present circumstances, and a lot of those present circumstances are economic circumstances. So like whether or not white people like, yes, the economy was doing better, or rather had better potential than it does now in 1950s, but that's sort of been tied to to cultural elements that are not necessarily the factor for that.
I do want to move on just a little bit. I want to talk specifically about what did happen.
Sorry, okay. That's what I meant to say. I did want to bring up the fact what John said about the poll being bullshit. Maybe the poll is bullshit, but here's why I'm inclined to actually believe the poll at least a little bit, right? I brought it before. America as a country, and this has to do with institutionalized, or rather just how ubiquitous and hegemonic white supremacy actually is and how racism is. We teach the idea that quibbling over the moral complexities of racists and white supremacists and slavery and and all those sorts of things are okay. Like that's built into our sort of elementary education, because we learn about presidents, we learn about historical figures who have histories of native genocide, of owning slaves, of raping slaves. And those parts of their history are kind of whitewashed away, or used to paint them as morally complex as opposed to bad, right?
Let's not say kind of whitewashed away. You literally have to go outside of your school books to hear that Christopher Columbus was a genocidal rapist and just all around terrible person to begin with. B, you have to start looking at the fact that now the Civil War is being called the War of Northern Aggression by books in Texas. By the way, folks, those books will soon circulate to your children's school because Texas sets the national standard for textbooks. These are things that are happening. They don't call slaves slaves anymore in these textbooks. They call them undocumented workers. We have liberals out there comparing literal slavery, the literal capture and removal of people by force from their homeland, taken across the sea, held as property, beaten, murdered, and raped. They call that the equivalent to immigration. Like, this is the thing that's happening. It's not kind of whitewashed. They just completely gloss the hell over it because it's too hard for collective white America to wake up, look in the mirror, realize, wow, our country has been and always will be shit so long as we continue to do this.
Well, America's a country built on
right?
No, America's a country built on racism, right, and white supremacy as a byproduct or a subset of that. And so a lot of our institutions...
That seems like something that we just agree on, but that is a point of contention right there. That America's that's the genesis of America. You'll hear much more of the peachy rosy freedom, independence, individualism, rights, rule of law. You'll hear all sorts of those types of things, but you won't hear about the white supremacy or the racism or the systematic destruction of culture, history, lives, bodies, minds, and all that. You won't hear any of that.
Well, because the story of America is told from a Eurocentric and in a lot of ways white-centric, Anglo-centric rather, viewpoint, right? It's the idea that there was no culture, or rather, that there wasn't real culture before Columbus came here. There wasn't, real people here. Like that always seems to be the subset that, for all the bad things that colonization did, it inevitably brought with it the progress. It brought with it, progress. It brought with it, real culture. It brought with it these sorts of amorphous, or rather, let's be honest, coded terms for white supremacy. That's what colonization did. So it can't be all bad. And when I say, America is a white supremacist country built on racism and all those other things, like that is still with our institutions to this day. So we talk about the fact that, yes, people in schools don't really learn a version of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. We can't even, half the time people reference with Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, they don't even refer to it as rape. It sounds like it's his mistress.
Yeah.
Like the hard.
But I feel like we're getting a little far from what we were talking about on the show. And I want to refocus this directly on what happened in Charlottesville. We talk a lot about white supremacy, and I think there's a lot of information.
Okay,
so if y'all don't understand white supremacy, Google some shit. You're watching a show either on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever. You have access to the internet. If you're watching our show, you can Google some shit and you can learn some more. We need to talk about what happened in Charlotte. We need to talk about why they were there, right? We need to talk about what actually happened. And the fact of the matter is, we had Nazis marching through the streets of America. And we have people defending that right now.
I mean, fair enough. You know, we can come back to the Confederate statue issue and what that stuff signifies. But yeah, let's actually take it for what it is, you know, at the moment. So we had Nazis marching in Charlottesville, North Carolina. Virginia. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Durham right now. I'm thinking of Durham, North Carolina, with the statue.
Durham is where they did the statue for.
Yeah, that was nice. You know, Takia Thompson. You know, Takia Thompson, a hero, tore down the statue. You know what? We'll get to that as well.
We'll get to that
in a bit. So, like, I think that we're used to these kinds of marches now, these kinds of protests by now, right? We see them relatively popular. They're becoming relatively frequent. You know, no matter what they're called, free speech rallies. You know, I guess usually it's just free speech rally, right? Like it's a rally for freedom of speech. Alt-right rally. The Proud Boys come, you know, to defend against the Antifa. But this is the first time I would say that, like, the realities of white supremacy and racism, the material consequences of it, you know, for lack of a better word, became very clear to those who were part of that movement, just because they wanted to be a bunch of fucking edgelords.
Well, I mean, part of that is true, right? You have some of those people that did show up and were like, I'm going to come here and just trigger me some SJWs, and that's going to be the end of the fucking day. No, that's not what happened, right? So you had the one, and it's really funny. Unfortunately, we don't have a clip for you guys, but I'm sure you can find it, of the white kid who decided he was going to go to a Nazi rally, wear a white power T-shirt, and then when confronted by people of color, punked all the way out, like undressed, ran to the corner. I was here because I wanted to check out the site. Nah, beat his ass. Period. Beat everybody's ass who shows up, but beat his ass in particular. You hear, you know, what you just said, Brennan, being said by a lot of white folks who don't mean it in the same way that you do, right? A lot of the white folks are like, oh, they just showed up to exercise their First Amendment right. Nazis marching through the street is allowed. No, fuck that. They didn't just come to sit up here and march. They came with the express intent, to cause political violence, right? You decided to use their mere presence for intimidation to affect governmental and societal change. Pretty sure that's terrorism 101, folks. But moving beyond that, they also came and admitted on video, like old boy who cried during his little posting because he's got a warrant out for his arrest.
That was amazing. He caught a warrant.
Hold on, we'll get to that because I'm not done.
To be honest,
because they came through here. They came with the express intent to commit violent acts. They said on camera, "We will kill these people if we have to." They came armed with. Some of them came armed, and this is the militia folks, with automatic assault rifles. Some of these people came armed with pipes, bats, shields. They came ready to actually physically attack people, and that's exactly what they did. They drove a car to a crowd of people and killed somebody.
And it's been pointed out several times, but just quickly, that they weren't able to see the cars in front of them, and intended on charging through very many, like much more people than they got through. Like, so it was going to be a much more heinous act than it even was. But go ahead, continue.
Like, this wasn't. So this is for all you folks out there just being like, oh no, it's just edgy. It's not about being edgy. It's literally about violence. It's literally about political violence to affect societal change. Because they really, for whatever reason, think mixed people, people of color, disabled people, LGBTQIA folks are out here a threat to the quote-unquote right way. Let me go ahead and tell y'all something real quick. Let me go ahead and tell y'all white folks. Just generally speaking, you guys are the single largest demographic, right? Which means that we break everybody down into different groups: Black, Asian, Latinx, Native, white, right? White people have the largest single group of people. When you add everybody else up, just generally speaking, we outnumber y'all. Secondarily, if you take into account white folks who don't agree with you, we severely outnumber y'all. And then the ones who do agree with you and the ones who just like, I'm gonna sit on the sideline. No, y'all agree with them. Minority in this shit. They don't understand where y'all are coming from. Like, you're not going to affect any real change.
Well, they have a very high voter participation rate. That's one of the problems. But go on.
They do have a high voter participation rate, and that's part of the problem with the system. That's part of the problem with what's going on. That's why Nazis need to be afraid. Beat the living fuck out of them every time they step out of their house. Beat the shit out of them. Report them to their job. Dox them. Make their lives a living hell.
So now is the time where I'm going to hand wring about violence against Nazis real quick, and I'll say that, no, it's fine. This is my role. I'm going to hand wring about political violence is wrong, and we should find some other solutions to anyway. So what I was going to say actually was this. you know, when I say that a lot of the people who go to these rallies, you know, on the side of free speech, like, yes, do I think that they're going there to practice free speech? No, that's fucking stupid. Anyone who believes that, like, could you imagine being like over the age of 12 and believing that? I can't. But what I don't think they're going there necessarily to create violence or to be violent per se. What I mean by that is essentially this.
You're wrong.
No.
You're factually wrong, Brandon.
Let me finish. You can contradict me when I'm done, because maybe I am wrong, but here's what I'm trying to say, right? I think that there are definitely some neo-Nazis there who go with the, you know, hardcore neo-Nazis go there with the intent to create a violent scenario, to beat up marginalized people because they're fucking scumbags, right? But I do think that with the advent of the internet, I think Angela Nagel talks about this as well in her book, and I want to have her on soon because she has a new article on the Baffler. The internet age created a subset of, you know, Nazis, because they're still Nazis, right? Who are privileged white kids, privileged white mid-20-year-olds, privileged white fucking middle-aged people who should know better, who are disaffected and have some like grievance with society that is largely abstract from their actual material conditions. And just based on how they feel about it's nothing. And you know, based on how they feel about where they are socially right now. And so they join these movements because they're edgelords. And they want to go and they want to trigger SJWs and they want to trigger libs and they want to do all that stuff. And because they're so privileged, they have actually been successfully able to abstract the politics and the dangerous sociality of being in sort of, you know, extreme far right Nazi groups from the material violence that shit causes and indexes. And like, and you have these people.
Yeah, but I mean, like, look, you got 10 guys marching, and one of them's doing Sig Heil and screaming blood and soil, and you got 9 guys marching, still choosing to march with him and not go, oh fuck that guy, I'm out of here.
Oh yeah, of course they're Nazis.
No,
of course they're all Nazis. Like don't be ridiculous.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying with you know, the online movement's creating something where you've got the edgelords and you've got the irony bros and you've got this whole side of the alt-right. But the problem is that once you mobilize to the street, you're no longer actively just trolling people online. You're changing the dynamic of your argument. Now it's a matter of you've got 10 Nazis marching. Whether or not all 10 of them believe in the Nazi ideology or believe in genocide is a different matter. But at March, you got 10 Nazis marching.
But here's the thing. What's the word, right? Because you're factually wrong. You are factually wrong when we talk about this idea that a large portion, like there's not a large faction of these people. There's not even a sizable faction. Frankly, I would say that it is statistically irrelevant, right? The number of people that fall under the category in which you're speaking that attend these rallies. Because the fact of the matter is those people that do fall under that, they are not the type to show up at an actual rally. They're not the type to show up and mobilize. So we have one person, right? That one kid who pissed himself and went and took off his shirt. We had one. The fact of the matter is, these people that show up, these are Klan members. These are neo-Nazis. These are people who are dedicated to any means necessary of removing people of color, LGBT people, and anybody else that they deem unworthy from American society. These are people who feel that violence is their necessary aim. So, like, no matter what, whether it's physical violence or in the case that you're talking about, these kids that sit there online and talk about, you know, killing all black people and gassing Jews and denying the Holocaust and saying that all Mexicans are rapists and all these other things, those are still acts of violence. Those are not like those are there's no real difference between being just online, because you're still inspiring people. You're still going to, when you partake in those conversations, just like people want to say, well, you need to give Ann Coulter a platform. No, the fuck I don't. Because Ann Coulter was one of the people that radicalized, let me finish, that radicalized the Charleston shooter. These people are not innocent in any way, shape, or form. The people that show up for the rally go there with the specific intent of causing harm. And it's not just a small minority that is that way. They say it loudly. They say it proudly. They talk about the violence they're going to commit. Again, they said on video, they are willing to kill people. They are willing to kill people. You need to take them at their word. The fact of the matter is, political violence against fascists is not, in my opinion, violence. It's justice. It's the only morally correct stance to have.
Well, so here's the thing, right? So, like, two things. First, check the DMs, real quick, everyone, while I talk. Second, I agree, right? So there is this position where there are radical sort of gaps in people's understanding of what politics are and what these spaces actually are, right? So you can say, well, hey, what I say online is not violence. It's it's not real. It's abstract. Similarly, even more dangerously, like what I do politically, if I vote for Trump, that's not an act of violence, and it's just an abstract thing. It's just an abstract thing that that has no effect on material circumstances. And I think that people feel that way, not just the alt-right, right? But there's a subset of the population that there's a subset of population that feels as though politics does not actually have material circumstances, and so therefore any political behavior is not is not indexing any kind of real world effect. Like, well, if I vote for Trump, who cares? Like, it's just me expressing my freedom of speech or me expressing some sort of grievance, right? The funny thing about these people, of course, and why they're always crying is because this is the grievance policies. This is the grievance policy. This is the grievance politics and the grievance movement of the least aggrieved people in the entire world. Now, I joke about hand-wringing about violence against Nazis, and I'll be perfectly clear, right? Like, while no one in this channel advocates proactively being violent against Nazis, no one here, regardless of how anyone else feels, is going to sit down and admonish Antifa or admonish anarchists or admonish, people who are acting in radical self-defense against literal Nazi agitators, right? And so while I say, yeah, there are people who go to these people who go to these rallies who are essentially cosplaying as Klansmen, cosplaying as Nazis, and some of these people, like with the guns, cosplaying as the military, because we know these sorts of white supremacists, they love stolen valor insofar that I believe that being in the military makes you valorous. Like, that's not me saying that they're good people. In some ways, I would prefer that they were but them being actual Nazis would at least kind of make me think that, I don't know, like, I would be more amenable to it. But the fact that, they're just role-playing Nazi because they feel so aggrieved, usually because they can't get a date or whatever, that they have to, attack the most marginalized people is disgusting. But we're seeing an exodus from the alt-right, from every prominent alt-right media figure on Twitter and YouTube. It's like, oh, the alt-right is the alt-right is what was it, Jack Pro? So I can't pronounce his name. Like, basically every alt-right media person is distancing themselves from them, including Steve Bannon.
Here's the thing, though. And so you get here. I'm gonna actually address a couple of your points. One, you don't get to cosplay as a Nazi. You don't get to cosplay as a Klansman. You either are or you're not. When you show up to those rallies, when you get on those websites, when you comment on those message boards, when you talk about the things that they do, you're not cosplaying. You are literally a Nazi.
I think the point more being that they have no heart. It's all more bark than bite. But continue.
But the bark is dangerous, and here's why. And it's an act of white supremacist violence, whether or not you want to call it cosplaying or not, because I really don't feel that it's possible to cosplay as one of these hate groups. You either are or you're not. But let's say for the sake of argument, right, that we'll take Brandon's point and say that they're cosplaying. It's impossible, because when they start talking about these things, again, you're radicalizing real people who go out into the world and commit real acts of terror. Again, the Charleston terrorist, was radicalized first by people like Ann Coulter. And then he continued marching further and further and further and further to the right. He got onto the Daily Stormer website. He got onto all these, racist Twitter and all these other spots, and continued to further his radicalization. So you cannot tell me that there's anything that they do is cosplay. It's real. It's reality. What you present yourself online online is who you are, because that anonymity gives you the freedom to be your truest self. So these people are, it may be, well, I'm aggrieved because I think I'm not getting a job because black people get, they get free jobs. When actually black people have a higher unemployment rate because we face, racism just even in the workplace so much. Even getting a interview is hard for black people if your name sounds quote unquote too black. Anyways, right? So these people are committing acts of violence to begin with, but then when you physically show up to one of these rallies, when you align yourself with people that are driving a car through a crowd, when you align yourself with people that are beating an innocent black man with pipes and anything else they can get their hands on, you are aligned with violence. Your existence, therefore, becomes an act of violence.
Well, I do think this is a watershed moment, right? So, like, if we could agree, even if we can agree or disagree that prior to Charlottesville, there was some kind of moral gray area, which I don't think that at all, but I can think of a better phrase for it, for people in the alt-right in terms of whether or not they were good or bad or just misled or just, you know, impressionable youth, disaffected youth, whatever. After Charlottesville, there is none of that. Like, I think anyone who is still promoting that mentality is anyone who's still willing to join the alt-right after what happened in Charlottesville, anyone who's still promoting that mentality, anyone who's still promoting the frankly offensively dumb notion that Antifa and fascists are exactly the same because of whatever. I honestly, I don't know how you could even come to that position without, again, like, eating enough lead paint chips to kill you. I
have an explanation for that, actually.
No, let me finish. Let me finish my thought. Like, right, post Charlottesville, if you believe that, like, you're either a Nazi, you're either catastrophically dumb or a Nazi appeaser, right? It's just like because that's all there is. That's all there is now, right? There is no more. These are impressionable youth who don't know what they're doing. It's now okay. Well, there are now Nazis in the streets who are killing people because they don't believe that certain groups have the right to exist. And if you're willing to align yourself with them, regardless of what your own internal sense of like, well, I'm doing it because I'm confused or because, like, you know, I don't have any friends or whatever, no one cares anymore. Except for, you know, of course, white supremacists who still want to quibble over the, you know, the moral complexities of, you know, white youth who like apparently white men like are still youth in their mid to late 30s, but that's just whatever.
Well, that's young in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
It's young for viewers of mainstream media.
Right. Anyways, though, but so here's something that I've been seeing is there's not been a lot of equivocating between the alt-right, right, and the Antifa and all these, you know, BLM and these other folks from a lot of the peak ideology folks. And for those of you who don't get that joke, that's the centrist out there, right? But I do see a lot of white people saying, well, I'm not thrilled about Antifa. I'm not thrilled about BLM, but they're definitely not fascists, right? They're not as bad as the fascists. Well, here's the thing. You should be thrilled about both, because the fact of the matter is any organization that exists solely to fight fascism is a good organization. Like, fascism is a bad thing. Fascism wants people to die.
Whoa. Portrait and courage there, Adair. Fascism is a bad thing. You show you're ready to take such a bold stance.
Nazis are bad, folks.
No, we can joke about it, right? Like, we on this show, we can laugh at that. We can be like, oh, ha, that's funny, because we understand what the hell fascism is. The problem is all these peak ideology folks, all these centrists, all these white liberals literally don't understand that it's not a difference in opinion. It's not a difference in political ideology. It's not the same thing as Republicans and Democrats having slight differences over how they're going to, you know, maintain imperialism and all this other bullshit. It is literally groups of people out there who want the government to exterminate folks. It is terrible. It is literally calling for the death of anybody who's a person of color. They are literally acting out what they want. They are murdering people in the street. Literally every single person, and I mean that in the literal sense, not the hyperbolic sense. Every single person needs to be against fascism. Every single person needs to be a member of Antifa, because that is kind of our fucking job. That's literally kind of our job. That's something that, you know, is that Americans claim to hold dear, is this idea that we're against it. We're against fascists. We're against imperialism. We're against, you know, killing people because they belong to a marginalized group. Who are y'all? Where the fuck y'all are sitting over here?
There was polls going around before the election about whether, and I think shortly after, about whether basically to suspend the First Amendment with regard to whether people could practice the religion of Islam or practice the religion of Islam, and that got majority of Republican support, and especially scored well among Trump supporters. That we don't need a First Amendment if it's talking about Islam. And so, like, the idea that these people don't support fascism or aren't fascist, I mean, we have data to back up that given the opportunity, they would quickly and certainly apply it. And so,
they would apply it selectively, right? But what they don't realize, and so here's the thing,
fascism has always been applied selectively in the United States of America. It's just like,
that's the thing, but that's what we're talking about, right? That's what we're talking about with this, is they want to continue, these kind of things to continue. Liberals, for example, they're not against fascism. Like, especially all you white liberals out there who quibble about, I don't really like Black Lives Matter because I don't really agree with their tactics. Like, you guys just want equal opportunity imperialism across gender lines. You don't actually give a shit about liberation for anybody that's not white. And so that's part of the problem that we're running into. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these folks who are saying, well, there's not much difference between the two. There's a vast amount of difference between the two. Like, literally, my want for everybody to have, access to healthcare, income, housing, food security, education to whatever level they want to go is not equivalent to them wanting to kill me just because I'm Black. Like, there's no equivalence there at all.
I would say that they do care about across race lines to a degree, as far as presenting.
They want a lot.
How many pussy hats have you seen at the Black Lives Matter?
They want a lot of Black board members. They want at least.
How many pussy hats do you see at a Black Lives Matter?
They just want the Black board members to say exactly what the white board members would say. But go ahead.
I don't follow that kind of stuff. But what I was going to say is this, like, just to clarify my early statements about like this being a watershed moment for the alt-right. And at these rallies, you would definitely hear people say, like, chant racist slogans like, "Oh, you will not replace us," and all other stuff that is obviously rooted in deep neo-Nazi ideology and rhetoric.
It's rooted in actual Nazi ideology.
Like
the Nazis literally said, Jews will not replace us. That's the original phrase. Jews will not replace us.
And people that they were shouting, Jews will not replace us, they were also shouting blood and soil, which was a Nazi slogan.
In the Department of Agriculture. That was their literal slogan.
And of course, people are sick hailing, and like I think even Trump said, like, like, at least reference "you will not replace us" with the statue thing. But like ultimately, like, I think that a lot of that was, I guess my point was, like, a lot of that was based around a social component of this whole thing. Like, it was just people parroting language. And I think now after Charlottesville, it's going to have a very big, cognitive component. Like, hey, what does it actually mean to be the alt-right? And what does, and now I think a lot of people are seeing consequences. But as for, we can go about the consequences a little bit later. People are losing their jobs. People are being disowned.
There are people losing their jobs. Like, but like, there's no real,
of course.
There's no real jumping of ship. People are still like,
there was also Dylan Roof not very long before this, but go ahead, Adair. I know you're
right. No, I agree with you, Richard. You're right. Like, Richard, Dylan Roof, the Charleston terrorist, that should have been a watershed moment for a lot of these folks. But guess what? They stuck around. They stuck around through this entire time. Like, we're not seeing this massive jumping of ship. You have Steve Bannon, who gave a mild rebuke of the alt-right. But you literally have Donald Trump saying there's good people on both sides. He literally praised Nazis. Actual Nazis received praise from the president of the United States. Like, this, for them, is the best recruitment tool that they have had in a very long time. And to compound on that, again, going back to a lot of our audience, because I know quite a few of you are white and on the left, this whole idea of you have to fight hate with love thing, it doesn't solve anything.
Well, I think, Adair, quickly before you get on, Brandon, I just wanted to mention that it brings up something that I saw on some of the major networks talking about how, that Republicans can't be surprised by Trump, just as we're talking about that people can't be surprised by the alt-right or white supremacy. But they only go back a year or two, when Trump's history of this stuff and the history of white supremacy goes long back before a year or two, or the most recent events that we see. And people have been screaming at the top of their lungs about it, and it's been people refusing to listen, denying it, diffusing it, trying to diminish it, all of those types of things. And it's been years and decades even. And as we saw leading in the election. The picture of Hillary at Trump's wedding and them and schmoozing with each other. It's like these people were despicable people. That he was a despicable person then, and she was, you know, associating with him, and that was fine. But now, since these specific events have happened and so much attention has been drawn to them, now you have to I think that works for people who legitimately weren't engaged in that in following that information, but for educated, informed, politically engaged people that like senators, so on and so forth, that's not an excuse.
So I think that's a good two points, right? So first, someone wanted us to differentiate between Antifa and Black Bloc tactics and Black Bloc, right? So like, and a lot of times they've been collapsed into one sort of thing. Antifa is an organization that started in the early 20th century that was a response to the rise of fascism in Europe. So like a lot of people pretend like Antifa is two things, right? It's synonymous with Black Bloc, and it's some sort of new movement. You know, Antifa goes all the way back there. There's photos of Antifa rallies in Nazi Germany back in the 30s. Not like 90% of what Antifa does is organizing and education and basically what any other sort of political group would do. You know, organizing rallies, et cetera, et cetera. Black Bloc is a tactic that is associated largely with anarchism, and like actual anarchism, not sort of like anti-state, whether, you know, the sort of bastardization anarchism that's got, but anarchist opposition to violence perpetrated by the state or by fascists at rallies. So Black Bloc exists to protect people from, you know, police brutality, from fascist violence at particular rallies. Like that's the essential difference between both.
And to speak to my own experience with Black Bloc versus Antifa, when we were at the DNC, we saw Black Bloc trying to instigate fights with the police officers that were there and trying to instigate a crackdown. Whereas when the Philly police, wait, hold on, when the Philly police,
what because you're like factually, Black Bloc is not an organization; it's a tactic.
Well, these people were basically identifying themselves as Black Bloc, rolling out, trying to start fights, whereas more people identified themselves as Antifa rather than saying, I am part of this group or anything else, rolled out and stood in a line between the cops and us when the cops rolled off the back of the bus. So that's when I say, you know, okay, yes, this is tactical, this is everything else, but there does seem to be, in my eyes, within the organization itself, there does seem to be certain people, like Brandon was saying, anarchists who believe in the stronger tactics of Black Bloc whenever you even encounter any cops, not necessarily whenever you encounter cops doing a fascist example.
One sec, because here's the thing. Black Bloc is actually a tactic used by anti-fascists, by anarchists, by other groups, right? So Black Bloc, the tactic is to have a group of people wearing all black, you know, faces covered for so that way they can't be tracked by the state, right? That is a tactic where they then get together in a solid block, and it is black, and then they move as a unit, right? They go through and they, you know, whether or not they need to go beat somebody up because advocating violence, but this is just what's going on with the tactic. If someone's being beat by Nazis, what the Black Bloc does, the physical tactic, is it allows to get more people and space in there. Plus, everybody in that group is anonymous, so they cannot later then be tracked down for, you know, essentially trying to stop fascists from killing people. So that's what Black Bloc actually is.
So if I would say, yeah, so Black Bloc, it oftentimes puts their bodies between protesters, like nonviolent protesters, and, you know, police brutality and fascists. But, you know, where John's statement is given credence is that there is a certain subsect of people who participate in Black Bloc who believe that the best defense is a good offense. Like there is a certain group of, you know, a certain segment of Black Bloc who do participate in, you know, proactive, this is not the majority either, proactive destruction of property, because that's viewed as a legitimate strategy amongst them for preventing police violence. I don't believe that, but that's just, you know, that is a thing that some people believe.
Yeah, we literally saw them throwing things at cops that were just standing on bicycles trying to get a response, and that's that proactiveness that I'm not necessarily.
But that's not Black Bloc. That is not like an actual group. So that is specific people within an organization.
We're quibbling a little bit, but at that point, like at some point, it is worth mentioning that police officers do instigate violence at protest rallies. That is a known fact. That is a known fact. Like police officers are known for going to protest rallies in disguise, you know, undercover, and instigating riots, and, you know, in order to crack down like that. Like there is no debate over that. But I did want to go back, you know, circle back around to what Adair said about peak liberals. I think, yeah, like, you know, horseshoe theory is alive and well. peak ideology. Sorry. So if you believe in ass cheek theory, centrists are the whole. You believe in the ass cheek theory of politics, where you have the far right. The far right is the right ass cheek, and the far left is the left ass cheek. The centrist is the whole, because that's where all the shit comes out of. But no, I think that Trump adopting the language of alt left, the nomenclature of the alt left, might have woken a few of them up about that false equivalency, and how dangerous it actually is to make that false equivalency. I don't necessarily think that Trump using that language is going to do so much damage, right? I think that there's something said about, now that Trump has named this group, people are going to be targeting those who they identify as the alt left. There's going to be crackdowns and policies about the alt left. But I think that was happening anyway, right? I think that we saw policies aimed at making it legal to run over protesters already coming out prior to Charlottesville, and we know Cuomo is trying to create some sort of coded language law to crack down on Black Lives Matter protests, and incitement of riot and all other stuff. But I do think there's a certain segment of the population who are going to say, hey, you know what? Trump is saying that Antifa was fighting Nazis. I think that there is we know how powerful Trump opposing something actually is for organization, right? I think there is actually something to be said for Trump acknowledging, not only the alt left as an enemy of fascism and an enemy of Nazis, who he just could not seem to condemn, which is amazing, right?
Well, real quick, right before we go, because we got 5 minutes, guys, before we're gonna hop on the podcast. It's Donald Trump's block, right? Of course he's not gonna condemn neo-Nazis. And the only time he did, it was after great pressure from generals and other people in his cabinet. And then the very next day, he walked it back. He knows who his bread and butter is. He knows who likes him, who's going to support him. So obviously, Donald Trump has to do what Donald Trump does. But I'm going to go ahead and get my last word in now, since we've just got 6 minutes. And I just want to thank everybody who joined us on the live show. Stay tuned for the podcast. It's coming right up after this. Thanks to the Big Bro Ben, letting us be on the channel. My audio is a little bit better. See what happens, patrons? Your audio gets a little bit nicer when y'all help us out. So please go to the Patreon. It's patreon.com/expand the discourse. I'm going to go ahead and hop off and let the other guys do what they do for the last 6 minutes before we really fuck some shit up on the podcast. Check that out on SoundCloud while SoundCloud is still around.
I'll say quickly that part of what this goes back to during the election season, when Donald Trump was essentially running on speaking directly to the group of Americans that Republicans had only dog whistled for generations. And when he went out there and started explicitly saying exactly what they were thinking, and saying it on a national stage, and had the media waiting on bated breath for whatever wild statement he would make, then whatever statements that would come out after, and now it's the wild statement followed by his staff trying to walk it back, with him going back and saying the opposite. And it's a cyclical thing that we could have seen coming and should have seen coming, and I think many people did see coming. And at this point, what's concerning me so much now is that it doesn't seem like Democrats have any plan or any strategy, even though it seems though some of the people, the rank and file, the members of the Democratic Party, are starting to realize the weaknesses and the fallacies that they've been getting from the establishment leadership for years. And I think that that's going to Donald Trump has created an opportunity for all the suffering and pain that he's causing, and the amplification of white supremacy that has been a result of his election. All of that, it's also been an awakening, I think, like as Brandon mentioned during the show. And I think that we would be
remiss.
We would be amiss to miss this opportunity and seize it with everything that we've got. So we're not as ready as we could have been had we had some better leadership from folks like Bernie Sanders and some of the other people that a lot of the folks that are listening to this rallied around. But we have an opportunity now, so I think we need to seize it. So that'll be my last piece.
And you know what? I just keep coming back to the Pied Piper strategy. I mean, this was a strategy memo that the DNC released where they wanted to elevate this. So they knew they were playing with fire. They knew they were gambling. And when the mainstream media went along with this, they were doing it for profits. Les Moonves said flat out, Donald Trump might not be good for America, but it's good for NBC. Well, this is not being good for America. This resurgence of white supremacy, this resurgence of Nazis, this is all and them getting mainstream is a direct result of a collaborative effort. While Donald Trump should be absolutely condemned and is evil at this point, I'm willing to say that he is evil. The rest of everybody who basically allowed for him to come to the position where he can be our president, it's a multifaceted group, it's a multifaceted effort, and all of those people are basically complicit in this.
Well, so here's what I would say, right? I think there's two interesting points, right? What I wouldn't say earlier was this. Ultimately, I think Donald Trump is a good example of why we have to combat racism that we view. Essentially, Donald Trump is everyone's racist friend. He's everyone's racist friend. He's everyone's misogynist friend. He's everyone's braggadocious friend. Grandfather, uncle, who we kind of downplay the actual effects of that as a society. I think that in certain situations we have this kind of gap in understanding between the ways that racism plays out at various levels. It's a multivalent kind of thing. You have interpersonal racism, that you have internalized racism, you have structural, institutional, et cetera, and it's all because racism is such a hegemonic and a hegemonic part of American culture that has so many different kind of manifestations, where you're talking about white supremacy as American exceptionalism, white supremacy as structural racism, and the fact that roads in black communities are worse than roads in white communities, racism as just being called the N-word. It just manifests so many different ways, and we have a hard time seeing the connection between them. And now that Trump is in office, I think everyone should take a lesson from that. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe next time I hear my racist friend say something untoward, I should confront them and let them know that's not okay, right? And so we talk about the solutions to the rise of fascism. And even though I guess at this point, people are, after Charlottesville, people are still trying to play well, you said it was economics anxiety. It's like, yeah, but you know what, fuck boy? We have actual data that shows that fascism and white supremacy and racist attitudes actually do go on the rise after, during, times of economic deprivation. We know that scientifically. We know studies have shown that when, jobs are scarce, resources are scarce, people view people of color as darker, more malicious. It's tied together. They're intrinsic parts of one another. But oftentimes we have a hard time socially sanctioning our friends and family for their racism. Imagine, imagine what would happen if Hillary Clinton's had and Donald Trump's friends had sanctioned him for his racism. But honestly, it's really just that they were all racist too. We can go a little longer there. We started a little late. It's fine. You go, but I
wrap it up, Brandon.
The lesson I'm trying to talk about is that, hey, you know what?
We've got
the revolution starts at home. Revolution starts at home. It starts at the interpersonal. It starts, at the micro level, because that has macro level effects. So it starts with you confronting your own racism, and it starts with you confronting your friend's racism, and not just special pleading both of those things away. And so, we'll come back after the break to the fun half of the show, and we'll talk about, the potential present in Trump's explicit racism, and also the dangers of Trump being so explicitly racist. We'll talk about the faux dichotomy between the alt-right and the alt-left. We'll talk about centrism. We'll talk about the idea that Confederate statues are history, and we'll touch on North Korea. So, definitely, if you have not gone over to SoundCloud, definitely go to SoundCloud and check out the full episode later, which will be posted probably by Saturday. And join the SoundCloud if you find it in your heart and find it in your wallet. It's hard time to become a patron. Even $1 helps. And we're gonna start rolling out the new Patreon rewards in the upcoming days. Sorry for the delay. I've been I've been a little sad, but it's fine. Everything's fine now. Thank you for joining us for the first half. Have a good night, late afternoon, whatever.
Whenever you listen.
Whenever you listen, really.
Brandon still sucks.